The Last of Us Part 3? I hardly knew ye. Okay, so Neil Druckmann has essentially confirmed that we are going to be getting a Last of Us Part 3. So they did like a documentary. It's called Grounded Part 2, the making of The Last of Us Part 2. I haven't gotten to watch it yet, but I did want to read a little excerpt from it. I don't have a story, but I do have that concept that, to me, is as exciting as 1, as exciting as 2, is its own thing, yet has this through line for all 3. So it does feel like there's probably one more chapter to this story. Technically speaking, being as clear as I can be with my reporting, it's technically not confirmation, but I also don't think that Naughty Dog or Sony would actually put that in the documentary, because this is a documentary produced by themselves. I don't think they would put that in the documentary if it wasn't going to happen. And what I'm also curious about, I don't know this for sure, is when they recorded that line of dialogue for the documentary, was that something that they recorded recently for the documentary, or was that something that they recorded while the game was in development? I'm on it, honest to God, I'm not sure about that part, because if that was recorded while they were making The Last of Us Part 2, then it's possible that The Last of Us Part 3 is like in development right now. But if that's something that was recorded recently, then it's possible that they did The Last of Us Part 2, they started working on some other game, hopefully a new IP, to be honest with you, but it's possible maybe it's like another Uncharted game or something. Maybe they're going back to Jack and Daxter. Hey! Probably not. And then after that, then they'll do The Last of Us Part 3. So honestly, I don't know how that's all working out. And the bigger question that I have is, do I want this? Should they make this? Let's get into that. So, do I personally want a Last of Us Part 3? Not really. And by the way, I love The Last of Us Part 1, and The Last of Us Part 2 is not just my favorite video game of all time, it's my favorite piece of narrative media of all time. I mean, before I even get into just analyzing it critically, I've simply never experienced a piece of media that has emotionally impacted me the way that The Last of Us Part 2 emotionally impacted me. I felt genuine sadness. I felt genuine anger. I genuinely grieved a fictional person. I've simply never experienced any piece of art that genuinely affected me the way that that game affected me. So there's that. But do I want another part? I would say no. And by the way, I am gonna spoil it. So if you've never played The Last of Us or watched the series, get it out of here. If you're somebody that's only watched the series, but you've never played The Last of Us Part 2 and you're just waiting to watch season 2 of the show, definitely get out of here. But like when you get to The Last of Us Part 2, or I should say when you get to the end of The Last of Us Part 2, Ellie gets to like a pretty solid ending point for her character arc. Throughout that game, she's hunting down Abby because she feels like Abby stole her ability to forgive Joel. But when you get to the end of that game, she realizes that she can forgive Joel. She did forgive Joel that night at the balcony, and Ellie was able to reconcile that with herself. So I feel like that's actually a really good place to just end the two games. And because there were a lot of people that didn't want Last of Us Part 2 because they were like, the ending of the first game was so perfect, it was ambiguous, blah, blah, blah. And I honestly feel like that's massive cope from people, because when you get to the end of The Last of Us Part 2, it's like completely obvious to me that at least part of the events of The Last of Us Part 2 were going to happen. Obviously, Ellie and Joel were going to clash about the events of them getting to the Firefly Hospital. That's why these games are so powerful, in my opinion, because it's like anybody that thought that the ending was ambiguous and that wasn't going to happen, they are Joel, selfishly thinking and hoping for what they want to happen. I mean, that's just hilarious how meta these games get. But that's where we stand now, where at the end of The Last of Us Part 2, there's not really an obvious way to go for a third game, whereas I did think that there was an obvious way to go for a second game. And then obviously they went even different directions by, killing Joel and all of that. So when it comes to The Last of Us Part 3, I mean, I guess you could do a thing where Ellie and Abby become friends, maybe? I don't know that I want that either, because that That just seems like uncharacteristic of the world of The Last of Us. Although I guess that's not true because Tommy and Joel, they separated and then they eventually came back together. So I mean, I don't know. You could do it, but I feel like Ellie and Abby coming together and becoming girlfriends, that kind of, I don't know, to me that feels kind of like dissonant of this harsh world of The Last of Us. I mean, and there are also other questions of like, did Ellie just go back to Jackson? Did Dina just go back to Jackson? And if Ellie goes back to Jackson, I assume that Dina probably wouldn't want to get back with her, although maybe she does. I mean, is that a thing? She probably would have just gone off on her own and not gone to Jackson. I don't think that she would want to have Dina like go through the stress of dating her again. Even though she's like, hey Dina, I'm not like I was before. I'm not the same girl. Like I don't know that would make much sense for Dina to even want to get back into that. So I do think that if you were to do a third game, I think it would have to just be Ellie going out on her own. And I think it would have to be all new characters and whatnot. And I guess I'm not opposed to that. I just have no frame of reference of where you would take that story. And as Neil Druckmann says, sort of loop it back around to the first two games. I just have no frame of reference for what that would even be. So that's where I'm at. But then that gets to like the third question that I would pose, which is it smart to make a Last of Us Part 3? And in my opinion, it's a bit of a gamble, because the truth is that as much as I love The Last of Us Part 2, I'm not pre-loving The Last of Us Part 3. As much as I love The Last of Us Part 2, it was incredibly divisive. I mean, I always describe it as it is the Last Jedi of video games, right? Where half of the fan base think that it is just the worst thing that's ever been made by humans, right? Neil Druckmann traveled back in time and murdered your childhood. Or then the other half of it are like me, where I'm like, this is literally the best thing that anybody's ever made. I don't know what you guys are smoking. And so when you have that and you have to grapple with the fact that it also sold far less than the first game. The first Last of Us, from what I've been able to look up, sold a little over 20 million copies so far, and The Last of Us Part 2 has sold a little over 10 million copies so far. So, I mean, that's about half. And 10 million copies, don't get me wrong, is a lot of copies, but it's simply not the juggernaut success of that the first one is. Now, to be fair, the first Last of Us did have a weird thing where it kind of double dipped a little bit, where the game's released on PlayStation 3 at the end of the PlayStation 3 life cycle, and then they released The Last of Us Remastered, which was kind of like another thing. It was a launch title, I want to say, or at least close to launch title for the PlayStation 4. So it kind of did the thing where it not only had an install base on at the end of the PlayStation 3's life cycle, where it had that massive install base, and then it sort of was like one of those games that you just kind of got when you got a PS4. So it's one of those things where in some ways, The Last of Us had a bit of a leg up. There was a lot of double dipping by people, and like a couple years, after the PS5 came out, they finally come out and did The Last of Us Part 2 remastered. But that's also another situation where I feel like a lot of people are getting kind of sick of these remasters, and I don't think that they have the same impact that The Last of Us Remastered had. And it's also like we're now a couple years out from the launch of the PS5, so The Last of Us Part 2 is having to compete with a bunch of other PS5 games. It's not going to be just one of those games that you get because you have a PS5. But to be fair, I mean, maybe The Last of Us Remastered or Part 2 Remastered does end up selling a lot. And who knows, maybe season 2 of the show and it gets critically acclaimed, and a bunch of people that have never played the games before, because I mean that does happen. Maybe a bunch of people that never played the game run out and they get The Last of Us Part 2 on PS5, and then the sales run up from that, and then maybe that justifies a third game. But as of right now, there's no denying that the second game was significantly less popular than the first game. And so when you're getting into a Part 3, at this point, the people that hate the second game, they hate that game because of what they did with Joel. And there's simply no way of of fixing that. I mean, unless you want to decide that we're now in a fantasy universe and and Joel gets resurrected. Maybe a Last of Us Part 3 ends up being a prequel where you play as Tommy and Joel. I mean, I know that's a game that like they've talked about before, like a Tommy and Joel game. Maybe they make that game or something. But as much as I hate to say it, because again, I love The Last of Us Part 2. It's my favorite game of all time. I think that if you were to make a Last of Us Part 3 that's just about Ellie, I think that's a gamble. You know, I don't think that that's a surefire hit. And that's just something that I'm being real about. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Should they make the game? Should they not make the game? Would you be excited for it? Would you not play it? I want to hear from you. Goodbye.